5 tactics narcissists secretly hate most. And I want to begin with the word secretly, because it is the most important word in this title, and the one that contains the entire psychology of why these specific tactics work in the way they work, and why most people never discover them. Secretly is doing something very specific here. It is pointing at the gap between what a narcissist's behavior communicates about what bothers them and what actually bothers them at the level where the disturbance is genuine and significant. Because the narcissist's public responses to things that threaten the construction, the dismissal, the contempt, the performance of being entirely unbothered by whatever just happened, are not accurate reports of the internal experience. They are the construction's responses, the management layer, the specific, practiced, highly polished presentation of a person who is not affected by the things that are actually affecting them most. And most people, observing the construction's response to the things they do in the relationship, take the construction's response as accurate information about what is and is not penetrating. They see the dismissal and conclude that their observation did not land. They see the contempt and conclude that their clarity did not register. They see the performance of being unbothered and conclude that they have not found anything that actually bothers this person. And they are wrong. Not about what they observed. The dismissal and the contempt and the performance are all real and accurately perceived. Wrong about what the observation of those responses tells them about what is happening underneath them. Because the narcissist's most powerful responses are not the performances of being unbothered. They are the secret disturbances that the performances of being unbothered are specifically designed to conceal. And the 5 tactics in this episode are the 5 things that most reliably produce those secret disturbances. The 5 things that get past the construction's defenses and land in the place where the actual response is generated. By the end of this episode, you are going to know exactly what those 5 things are, exactly why they work at the level they work, and exactly how to apply them in the specific way that makes them most effective without making you the kind of person you do not want to become. Because that last part matters, and we are going to get to it. Let's establish the foundation first, because the 5 tactics only make full sense when you understand the specific vulnerability they are all targeting. The narcissist's construction, the false self, the presented persona, the carefully managed version of themselves that the world is given access to, has one foundational vulnerability that all 5 tactics exploit in different ways. That vulnerability is the construction's dependence on other people's participation for its maintenance. The construction cannot sustain itself in isolation. It requires an audience. It requires the ongoing confirmation of other people's responses to the presented self to maintain the presented self's sense of reality and significance. Without the confirmation, the construction is a performance with no one watching, and a performance with no one watching is not a performance, but simply a person alone with the actual self that the performance was always covering. And the actual self, in the narcissist's psychology, is not a comfortable place to be left alone with. It is the place where the wound that made the construction necessary still lives, largely unexamined and largely unhealed, producing the ambient anxiety that the construction was built to manage. The construction manages this anxiety by converting it into the supply, seeking that keeps the confirmation coming. The supply seeking keeps the confirmation coming. The confirmation keeps the construction's sense of reality intact. And the actual self stays sealed off from conscious examination, which is exactly where the construction needs it to stay. The 5 tactics all work by disrupting some part of this cycle, by removing or distorting or redirecting the confirmation in ways that the construction cannot smoothly manage. And the disruption of the cycle lands in the actual self, in the place where the anxiety lives, in the form of a specific disturbance that the construction's surface responses are deployed to conceal. That concealment is the secretly, and the disturbance underneath the concealment is what the 5 tactics produce. The first tactic is the one that narcissists hate most at the deepest level, and that produces the most significant disturbance in the place the performance is designed to conceal. It is the application of genuine, consistent, unjustified indifference. Not performed indifference, not the pointed, intentional, visibly deployed, not caring that is itself a communication about caring. Genuine indifference. The specific quality of someone who has processed the relationship and its dynamics thoroughly enough that the narcissist's presence in their awareness has genuinely reduced to a level that requires no management and produces no particular response. The genuine indifference is not something you perform. It is something you arrive at. And the reason it is the most hated of the 5 tactics is that it is the one that the construction has the fewest available responses to. Every other category of response that the person in the narcissist's orbit can produce, warmth, admiration, anger, hurt, contempt, sadness, fear, even the clear-eyed. Boundary-maintaining composure that is the recommended response in most therapeutic frameworks. Every one of these responses confirms the narcissist's relevance. They confirm that the narcissist is significant enough in the other person's psychological landscape to produce a response of some kind. Significance is supply. Even negative significance is supply. Even the contemptuous dismissal of someone who clearly still cares enough to be contemptuous is supply, because the contempt is organized around the narcissist and therefore confirms the narcissist's centrality in the other person's emotional world. Genuine indifference confirms nothing. It provides no supply of any quality. It is not organized around the narcissist at all. It is the simple, natural, entirely unintentional consequence of a psychological landscape in which the narcissist has genuinely ceased to occupy significant territory. And the construction, encountering genuine indifference, has no adequate response. Because the response options all require significance, require the person to be affected enough to be moved in some direction. And genuine indifference is the specific absence of being affected, which is the specific absence of the confirmation that the construction requires, which lands in the actual self as the specific form of anxiety that the construction was built to prevent, the anxiety of genuine irrelevance, of not mattering, of the wound underneath the construction being correct in its assessment that the actual self, without the construction to make it impressive, is not something that other people organize around. Genuine indifference does not make that argument explicitly. It simply is the evidence. And evidence, for the narcissist system, is more threatening than argument. The second tactic is closely related to the first, but operates through a different mechanism and produces a different specific quality of disturbance. It is the maintenance of absolute consistency between your stated position and your actual behavior. And I want to be precise about why this specific thing produces the disturbance it produces, because it might not be immediately obvious why behavioral consistency would be something a narcissist particularly hates. The reason it produces disturbance is that the narcissist operational model of the people in their orbit is built on the assumption of a gap between stated positions and actual behavior. The narcissist's entire toolkit, the guilt deployment, the intermittent reinforcement, the love bombing cycle, the specific calibration of pressure and warmth that keeps the other person in the orbit, all of it is designed to exploit the gap between what people say they will do and what they actually do when the tools are applied. The person who says they will not accept a certain behavior and then accepts it when the love bombing is sufficiently intense. That gap is the opening the narcissist's tools require. The person who says they will maintain no contact and then responds to the third message after the indirect monitoring becomes direct. That gap is what the monitoring was designed to identify and exploit. The person whose stated positions are reliable predictors of their actual behavior provides no gap for the tools to enter. And tools without an entry point are not tools. They are weight the narcissist carries without the return that the weight is supposed to generate. The absolute consistency between stated position and actual behavior is therefore not just the protection of the person maintaining it. It is the specific disabling of the narcissist operational model. The model requires the gap. The consistency removes the gap. And the removal of the gap lands in the narcissist's system as a specific quality of frustration that is different from ordinary frustration, because it is not frustration with a specific outcome, but frustration with the reliability of the terrain. The terrain is not behaving the way terrain is supposed to behave. The map is wrong. And a wrong map, for a psychology organized around the confidence of having an accurate map of the people in its orbit, produces the specific disturbance that the second tactic is designed to produce. Not anger. Not the manageable, directable anger that the construction can deploy productively. A more diffuse, more foundational disturbance. The disturbance of someone whose primary navigational tool has been rendered unreliable by the specific quality of the person it is supposed to map. The third tactic is the one that produces the most visible response from the narcissist, and that is therefore the most frequently misread as confirmation that it is not working. The third tactic is the public or social demonstration of genuine thriving. And the misreading is this: when the narcissist responds to visible evidence of your thriving with contempt, with the dismissive characterization of the thriving as performance or as insignificant or as somehow less than it appears, the most common interpretation is that the contempt is evidence the tactic did not land, that the narcissist is unaffected, that the demonstration of thriving did not produce the disturbance it was intended to produce. This interpretation is exactly backward. The contempt is the evidence that the tactic landed. Because the narcissist who is genuinely unaffected by your thriving does not produce contempt, they produce nothing. Genuine indifference, which is the narcissist's ideal response to anything that does not threaten the construction, requires no contempt. Contempt is a response. It is the construction managing a threat, and the threat it is managing. The specific threat that the visible demonstration of your genuine thriving poses to the narcissist construction is the narrative threat we discussed in previous episodes. The narrative that the relationship's ending was appropriate, that you were not as valuable as the dynamic might have suggested, that the supply economics calculation that produced the distance or the discard was accurate. Your visible, genuine, undeniable thriving in the absence of the relationship is the most specific and most public rebuttal of that narrative available. And the contempt is the construction's attempt to reframe the rebuttal as something other than what it is. As performance rather than reality, as compensation rather than genuine flourishing, as something that does not actually refute the narrative, because it does not actually represent what it appears to represent. The contempt is the effort required to maintain the narrative in the presence of evidence that the narrative is wrong. And effort is the tell. Genuine indifference requires no effort. The contempt is the secret disturbance made briefly visible by the effort required to contain it. And the fourth and fifth tactics, which produce the most sophisticated and the most permanent of the disturbances, and the specific way to apply all five of these in a way that is genuinely protective without compromising the person you are becoming. That is exactly where we are going next. The fourth tactic is the one that requires the most internal development to deploy effectively, and that produces the most lasting disturbance in the narcissist system precisely because of what it requires. It is the specific, consistent, completely unapologetic ownership of your own narrative, not the aggressive, publicly performed ownership that is organized around the narcissist and therefore still confirms the narcissist's centrality. The quiet, grounded, matter-of-fact ownership of your own account of what happened, available when it is asked for, offered when it is relevant, stated clearly when it is appropriate, and not organized around the narcissist's response to it, or the narcissist's version of it, or the narcissist's ongoing attempts to revise it. The ownership of your own narrative is one of the most specifically threatening things a person can do to a narcissist's construction, because the narcissist's construction requires narrative control, not just in the obvious sense of controlling what other people know about the narcissist, though that is part of it, and it is significant. Narrative control in the deeper sense of maintaining the version of events that makes the construction's history coherent. That explains the endings as natural progressions, rather than as the consequence of specific choices. That positions the narcissist as the reasonable party in conflicts where reasonable is not what the evidence supports. That makes the people who were damaged by the relationship the architects of the damage rather than its recipients. The narcissist's construction depends on this narrative in the way that any internally organized system depends on its organizing story. The story is what makes the individual elements coherent, what gives the construction's history a shape that the construction can inhabit without the discomfort of inconsistency. And your ownership of your own narrative introduces a competing story into the same landscape, not aggressively, not in ways that are organized around destroying the narcissist's version, simply by existing, simply by being a person who has a clear, consistent, grounded account of what happened that reflects your genuine experience of it, and that does not require the narcissist's endorsement to remain stable. The competing narrative does not need to win to produce the disturbance. It needs only to exist, because its existence means that the narcissist's narrative is a narrative rather than the truth, and a narrative that is clearly only a narrative that exists alongside another narrative that has equal access to the available evidence, cannot maintain the quality of being obviously correct that the construction requires it to maintain. The disturbance this produces in the narcissist system is not primarily social. It is not primarily about what other people believe or which version of events gains more traction in the shared social world, though those outcomes are relevant. The primary disturbance is interior. It is the specific discomfort of a system that has been organized around a particular story of itself encountering the persistent, undeniable existence of a different story told by someone who was there, who has access to the same evidence, and who has not revised their account to accommodate the construction's needs. That persistence, the simple, unapologetic persistence of your own account, is the fourth tactic. And it is hated by the narcissist system with a consistency and a depth that the surface dismissal of it almost never accurately represents. The fifth tactic is the most sophisticated of the five, and the one that requires the most careful description, because it is the most easily misapplied, and the misapplication produces not the intended disturbance, but something that serves the narcissist rather than disrupting them. The fifth tactic is the selective, strategic, entirely genuine expression of your full self in context where the narcissist has access to information about what you are expressing. Not in contexts where the narcissist is the audience. The narcissist being the audience transforms the expression into a performance for the narcissist, which is supply regardless of the content. In contexts where the narcissist is not the audience, but where information about the expression reaches the narcissist through the channels that the monitoring we discussed is consistently providing. The full self being expressed in these contexts, the specific qualities of depth and perception and emotional intelligence and genuine aliveness that the relationship required to be managed, diminished, made smaller and less threatening than they actually are, produces in the narcissist's system the most specifically personal of the 5 disturbances. Because what the narcissist is receiving information about through the monitoring channels is not just your thriving in the general sense that the third tactic produces. It is the specific, recognizable, named quality of you that the relationship worked to suppress. The depth that the construction found threatening. The perception that the construction found destabilizing. The full aliveness that the construction found impossible to be the consistent focus of without the anxiety of being genuinely known rising to a level that the management system could not contain. All of that, now expressed freely and fully in a life that the relationship suppression is no longer constraining, reaches the narcissist through the monitoring channels as something that produces a very specific and very compound disturbance. The first component of the compound is the recognition, the involuntary, genuine, undefended recognition that what is being expressed is the fuller version of what was in the relationship, the version that the relationship's dynamic was not allowing full expression. The second component is the implication of that recognition, that the relationship's dynamic was the suppressing force, that the fuller version was always there underneath the suppression, that what the construction required you to be smaller than you actually were to accommodate. And the third component, the one that produces the most specifically hated quality of the disturbance, is the comparison. The specific, involuntary comparison between the fuller version now being expressed in the current supply that is not producing that quality of depth, or that quality of perception, or that quality of genuine aliveness, because no supply source currently available to the narcissist has the capacity to produce it. The comparison is not something the narcissist chooses to make. It arrives involuntarily. And it arrives with the specific quality of something that cannot be simply dismissed or reframed or managed through the construction's usual mechanisms, because it is organized around the recognition of something genuine rather than around something that can be retrospectively devalued. Now let's talk about the part that matters most, and that I said at the beginning we were going to get to. The question of how to apply these 5 tactics in a way that is genuinely protective without compromising the person you are becoming. Because this is where most content about tactics for dealing with narcissists fails, in a way that this episode is specifically designed not to fail. The failure is this: the tactics are presented as things to do to the narcissist, as weapons, as tools for producing a specific outcome in the narcissist's experience. And the moment the tactics are framed this way, the moment you begin deploying them in service of producing an outcome in the narcissist rather than in service of living your own life most completely and most honestly, they stop being the 5 things narcissists secretly hate and become something else entirely. They become the thing that keeps you organized around the narcissist. They become the mechanism through which the narcissist continues to be the center of your psychological landscape, now dressed as strategy rather than as attachment, but organized around the narcissist nonetheless. And a life organized around the narcissist, even a life organized around disrupting the narcissist rather than pleasing them, is not the life the tactics are supposed to be producing. The tactics are not weapons, they are descriptions. They are accurate descriptions of the natural byproducts of a specific kind of internal development, the development of genuine indifference, of behavioral consistency, of visible authentic thriving, of narrative ownership, of full self-expression. All 5 of these things are the natural byproducts of a person who has done the work of genuinely leaving the relationship's influence behind and genuinely arriving in their own life. They are not things you do. They are things you become. And they produce the disturbances they produce not because they are aimed at the narcissist, but because genuine development in a person who was diminished by a relationship is specifically threatening to the psychology that did the diminishing. A threat is not created intentionally. It is the natural consequence of the becoming. The narcissist secretly hates these 5 things not because the person doing them is trying to disturb the narcissist, but because the narcissist's construction was built in a world where people who were diminished by it stayed diminished. And the person who does not stay diminished, who arrives at genuine indifference, who maintains absolute consistency, who thrives visibly and specifically, who owns their narrative quietly and without apology, who expresses the full version of themselves freely in the life that the construction's influence is no longer constraining. That person is the most specific and most complete rebuttal of everything the construction required them to be, and rebuttals of that quality, embodied rather than argued, lived rather than stated, present in every ordinary day rather than deployed in specific confrontations. Those are what the narcissist secretly hates most. Not because you aimed them at the narcissist, because you finally, completely, without requiring the narcissist's response to make it real, aimed them at yourself. At the life that was always supposed to be this full. At the person you were always supposed to be before the construction required you to be less. That person, fully expressed, is the most powerful thing you can become. And the narcissist's secret hatred of it is simply the construction's honest acknowledgement that this was the version of you it was never equipped to manage. And it was right. This version was never going to be manageable. It was always going to be this free.